Good morning, everyone. For those of you who don't know me, my name is John Brandon. I'm Senior Director of the Asia Foundation's International Relations Programs in Washington, D.C. I'm very pleased to welcome you to our webinar this morning on a book titled Flying Blind, Vietnam's Decision to Join ASEAN. And I'm pleased to have the speaker of this book join us this morning. He is Ambassador Nguyen Tung. He is currently Vietnam's ambassador to South Korea, but he has had a long distinguished career both as a diplomat as well as a researcher with the Diplomatic Academy of Vietnam. He became ambassador to South Korea around this time last year. He'll be there until 2023. Prior to that, he was president of the Diplomatic Academy of Vietnam, which is a leading think tank for foreign policy and security issues in Vietnam. He was president from 2016 to 2020. And probably many of you are familiar with Ambassador Nguyen from his time in Washington when he served as the Deputy Chief of Mission in Vietnam's embassy here in DC. He's no stranger to the United States. His graduate education was all here. His master's degree was done at the Fletcher School at Tufts University, and he did his PhD at Columbia University. I first met Ambassador Nguyen when he was a researcher at the Diplomatic Academy of Vietnam, well before that, back in the around late 1990s, 2000. His main areas of teaching and research are international relations theories, international relations in Southeast Asia and the Asia Pacific more broadly, Vietnamese foreign policy, and relations with major powers and ASEAN. And really, all of these subjects really are part of his new book, Flying Blind. He covers the period from 1973, when just shortly after the Paris Agreement was signed, to Vietnam joining ASEAN in 1995. I was thinking of what was his book addresses what was the thinking behind Vietnam's leaders joining ASEAN. What were the expectations from having membership in the grouping? Are some of the questions. Initially, Vietnamese ASEAN relations were hostile, and they largely looked through the lens of their ideological differences. I saw this a little bit, somewhat firsthand, on TV when I lived in Thailand in the late 1970s, when a member of parliament named Samak Sundaradeb, who later became prime minister in the 2000s, confronted Vietnamese foreign minister Nguyen Co Thach as he was in transit. And it was over the time that it was shortly after Vietnam had entered Cambodia in early 1979. And so I remember relations being very tense then, but they're indeed much different now. And Ambassador Nguyen is going to talk about that. He's going to speak for about the next 20-25 minutes. We'll then open up the floor for questions and comments. We have a box for Q&A, so please address any questions you might have in that box, not in the chat box, please. And I also ask that you kindly identify yourself and your institutional affiliation when posing your question. So with that, Ambassador Nguyen, welcome, and we look forward to your remarks.
Thank you, John. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, just fine.
Yes. Yeah, I really am thankful for the foundation for organizing these events for me, not only to introduce my book, but also to see my old friends from the Washington, D.C. time. I saw many familiar and good names in the list. And so my greeting from Seoul to all of you, to the old friends and new. This book is based on my PhD dissertation. I met at Columbia University It has been delayed for some time, mostly because of the sensitivity of the sources and because of the time constraints I had after I graduated from the school because of the jobs that I was back at the DAV, and also because of some editing issues. Many of you are aware of the editing process that are time consuming and also very demanding because of the I was told because of the marketability of the book. As a matter of fact, if you are familiar with my dissertation, it was somehow more theoretically based, arguing some fancy political science question and approaches as well. So when I approached some universities publications, publishing house in the US, and then finally the publishing house in Singapore, the demand from them is that I have to get rid of most of the theoretical stuff in order to make it more easy. I mean for the reader. So it came up with the version that you have in the book. Mainly, I would tell a story of the decision making in Vietnam with a specific decision of joining ASEAN. So it is as something really conventional about policy. Decision making in foreign policy. It involves the problems that the country had at the time and the context where the decision is made. Both domestic and international context, and the actors that involved in the decision making, and finally the process. And with regard to the question of joining ASEAN, I would try to answer the following questions. First, how the decision makers viewed the world, how they read the situation at home and abroad, and how they conduct the policy review and adjustments, and how they define friends and foes, and in a more general and abstract level, how they define national interest at the time when the decision is put on the table to be met. And finally, how they came up with this specific decision in terms of making a choice. So when I was able to answer the above mentioned questions, I would come up with the answer of why Vietnam decided to join ASEAN. And again, it links back to the what I call the fancy political science question of why. And my dissertation, as well as you can see that in the book, that the answer is somehow landed in the constructivist approach that focused on the importance of the process of socialization. In this case, in this specific case, is about the interaction between Vietnam and ASEAN in the period between, say, the early 1970s and the mid 1990s of the last century. So during this whole course of time, Vietnam's policymakers had to struggle with the question of how they see ASEAN countries. They started with a very hostile view of the ASEAN countries, and later on, with the help of increased interaction between Vietnam and ASEAN countries, the better understanding has been gained, and Vietnam has a more lenient and more understanding views about ASEAN. And likewise, the ASEAN countries also had a very friendly and accommodating approach toward Vietnam. And that process led to some point in the midway that both sides understood each other more. And the outcome of this process of better understanding is the recognition of the similarities, also of the differences. And in this specific case of Vietnam deciding to join ASEAN, luckily, the recognitions of the similarities seems to be outweigh the recognitions of the differences between Vietnam and the ASEAN countries at that time, and it led to the decision of Vietnam to join ASEAN. One of the smoking guns in my research through the archival documents as well as the interviews with decision makers at the time was the notion that I found in the political bureau's minutes of discussion. There are about 5 of them, very important and very key in the searching for the answers. They asked the MOFA officials several specific questions. One, is ASEAN SEATO in disguise, i.e. is ASEAN a military alliance in disguise? 2, is ASEAN anti-communist? 3, is ASEAN hostile to Vietnam? And 5, and next, is ASEAN okay with Vietnam being a membership? So the Ministry of Foreign Affairs officials who were giving them the answers, 3 no's to the 3 first questions and 1 yes to the last question. And one of the in the last meeting of the Politburo, as the records showed, the overall or the overwhelming consensus is that ASEAN is like us. And this specific sentence has been found in my research, and it shows really a very important point that the constructivist seems to suggest, that focusing on the similarity is a very good starting point for countries thinking of friendship, thinking of cooperative relations, and thinking of membership to some specific organizations that the members share some things in common. And my research found that Vietnam at that time, seeing ASEAN as the vehicle that can ensure Vietnam's external favorable conditions for focusing on the economic reforms at home. ASEAN also is a vehicle for Vietnam to improve its standing, improve its status in its relations with the big countries, namely the US, China, EU, Japan at that time, and ASEAN is also helping while helping the members to achieve economic development and good relations with outside countries can become a very good vehicle for the members, especially for the ruling parties to consolidate the legitimacy at home. So basically, these are the similarities that Vietnam found in ASEAN, namely economic development, legitimacy of the ruling party, and good relations with major powers. So it is basically the finding that I made in the research, and I hope that you can find it after reading the book. The process is not an easy one, because one of the most difficult thing that the leadership at that time had to get over is the ideological foundation for foreign policy of the country. It started in the book that in the 1970s, Vietnam was having a hostile view of, toward ASEAN, and mainly it is because of the ideological influence of the in the foreign policy, and it set very something like a black and white view about other countries. Either they are communist, socialist, or they are not. And if they are not socialist or communist, they are not the priority for the country to develop relations with. And later on, when Vietnam decided to join ASEAN, I hope that you can see that the influence of ideology is becoming less important. And it seems that Vietnam is adopting a new ideology, which is the developmental one. And from that, it is not really a big difference between Vietnam and the rest of the ASEAN countries, that the need for national development, especially in the economic growth, is something making Vietnam and the rest of the and the other ASEAN countries similar. And I think that in the book I also show that the debate or the internal discussion seems to show that the internal discussion is not really having a big consensus in the first place. There are people asking back and forth, not only about whether Vietnam should join ASEAN, but also a question of when and how Vietnam would join ASEAN. But again, the constructivist approach seems to suggest that when you had a breakthrough in the understanding that is materialized by greater socialization or greater interaction, the decision could be made surprisingly in a more in a quicker way. So I also show in the book that joining ASEAN, Vietnam found the similarities, and the understanding of how ASEAN could help Vietnam in terms of economic growth, or in terms of supporting the role of Vietnam in coping supporting Vietnam in coping with China are there, but really not really the strong point to support Vietnam's decision to join ASEAN. It is about the understanding, and it is even the decision to join ASEAN is made even in the absence of a good understanding of how ASEAN functions. There is an episode I wrote in the book that after the decision of joining ASEAN is made, Vietnam sent a delegation to the ASEAN Secretariat in Indonesia and also visited other countries of ASEAN to ask the question of how ASEAN functions. So the decision to join ASEAN cannot be fully explained from the institutionalist approach. So basically, it is what I really want to tell the story about Vietnam joining ASEAN. I tried also to show the relevance of my book in the contemporary context. And there are two aspects, I think, you might find out in the book, and you might agree with me. One is the better understanding of how decision-making process in Vietnam and again, it is about the actors, it is about the process, and it is about the problems that the decision makers trying to analyze. And the relevance is very is still there, and from even the cover of the book, I intentionally try to make the connection between what happened in the past and what happened right now, trying to show that Vietnam's commitment to ASEAN is there, and Vietnam, based on the benefits and also based on the identification of Vietnam with the rest of the ASEAN members, Vietnam wants to be more proactive, contributing, and more visible in ASEAN. And that was highlighted in the 2020 when Vietnam acted as the chair of ASEAN. And the second point of relevance I would like to mention is the possibility of applying the case of Vietnam into other parts of the world. And I'm lucky to be posted in Korea. When I see that we can do something, I mean, the lesson of Vietnam can be somehow repeated in here, in a sense that socialization, interaction can be made so that North Korea can become less a problem than now, and the case of Vietnam can be suggestive to what we can do with regard to bringing North Korea into the regional and the global community, the way Vietnam did, and with the help of the ASEAN countries and with the help of the rest of the world community. Of course, the comparison is not relevant totally, but it suggests of some possible way we can do So I would think that I end my presentation here and welcome the comments and questions from the audience. So thank you very much for being in the webinar today with me. Back to you, John.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Nguyen. As we'll give people some time to prepare some questions. Just one thing, someone was commenting that I guess there's maybe a glare or reflection from your glasses that maybe makes things a little, I don't know if you can adjust that on your screen. I know we can't do it from our end, but let me pose the first question to you.
Yes.
I think that's...
Is it okay?
I think that's better, yeah.
Okay, yes.
We're missing a little bit of the top of your head, but let's... Okay. I think as you lean in, I think we tend to get the reflection, but I think it is better. Vietnam joined ASEAN in 1995, and as you've described, it was a laborious, process and a learning process as well. After a bit over a quarter century of Vietnam's membership in ASEAN, in Vietnamese policymakers' views, how do they think Vietnam has benefited most from membership in ASEAN, and maybe where there's need for improvement?
Can I answer question by question?
Sure. Yeah, by all means.
Yes. One of the points that I mentioned in the book is that basically most of the benefits that Vietnam got in the betterment or in the improvement of relations with ASEAN countries, Vietnam got all the benefits before joining ASEAN. That means Vietnam got the after Vietnam withdrew troops from Cambodia, and after high level exchange between Vietnamese and ASEAN leaders have been materialized, and that coupled with the roadmap in the process of Vietnam-US normalization of relations and the normalization of relations between Vietnam and China, that was in 1991. So all the policy goals for Vietnam that aims at peaceful external conditions, environment, trade and investment to replace those from the Soviet Union and the Soviet bloc, and improved status of Vietnam in the region, have this interest or these policy goals had all been achieved. So what really the benefits of Vietnam joining ASEAN? And this with posing this question, I would like to put myself in an argument with the realist approach, seeing the policy making purely through the lens of trying to get the benefits, trying to get to reach the to ensure the interest. So I try to argue that all these interests have been met before Vietnam joining ASEAN, and that means there would be really no radical difference in Vietnam's after the membership is made. So what is really the benefit of Vietnam joining ASEAN? I try to argue that the benefit should be seen in another way, which is the constructivist one. It is the matter of finding a new identity for Vietnam to interact with the rest of the region and the rest of the of the world. And the question of identity is very important. Put in the specific context of the early 1990s, when Vietnam was not able to rely on the socialist bloc because the bloc itself disintegrated. And that was something really new for Vietnam. After like 50 years of being a member of the Soviet bloc. And when it disintegrated, the matter of finding a new identity is becoming more urgent for the leaders in Vietnam. On the second count, there were some efforts to keep the old identity, I mean the communist one, through the efforts of persuading China to become a new leader of the socialist bloc for the remaining socialist countries. And this effort was not successful because China declined to do so. So on the second count, it is something like a matter of luck. Because just imagine if China agreed in the Chengdu meeting that China was to become a new leader of the socialist bloc, and it seems that Vietnam was somehow ready to do that. So things would be radically different. So again, the benefit lies in the fact that Vietnam found a new identity, and this new identity serves as the starting point, as the new base for Vietnam to conduct a new policy under reform. And this new policy, in fact, helps Vietnam to gain the benefits that that are seen in conventional or realist way.
Thank you, Tung. Our next question is from John McAuliffe. He asks, how does ASEAN membership affect the East-South China Sea problem? U.S. support is both a helpful balance, but also a risk because of the growth of confrontation with China in U.S. politics.
Hi, John. It's so great to be in contact with you. Thank you for your question. In one of the chapters of the book, the South China Sea issue has been discussed, and the recognition by the leaders in Vietnam at that time is that ASEAN is not a vehicle for Vietnam to cope with China as far as South China Sea is concerned. And I'm lucky to find so many cables sent from embassies abroad, from the ASEAN capitals, from Washington D.C., from elsewhere, and all our most finest diplomats were telling the headquarters that ASEAN cannot be of help with Vietnam to cope with China as far as South China Sea is concerned. Basically, through the realist perspective of finding new allies to cope with China for a number of reasons. Number one is that ASEAN is not a military organization that help the members to cope with external threat. Number two is if it were the case, ASEAN as a collective group is of no match with China. And number three is that the US, especially in the case of mischief, we got concerning the Philippines, we also know have so that consolidate the belief in Hanoi that ASEAN is one, not a military organization like Seattle. The question they want to find the answer at that time, and two, we have to find new way to cope with China. So what is the new way? New way is that ASEAN would help Vietnam to achieve economic growth, to have good relations with not only neighboring countries, but also with big powers, including China. And that in a more abstract level would consolidate Vietnam's capabilities diplomatically, economically, to cope with the South China Sea issue. And I think that is the approach that Vietnam is doing right now in its membership in ASEAN. And we see the COC, DOC, and the meetings of ASEAN from the ministerial or the head of state levels are moving on that direction. Vietnam and the other ASEAN countries, especially the ASEAN claimants, are having something like a bargaining power to cope with China on the collective strength. But the effectiveness is still open to doubt. But it is what ASEAN can do right now, and it suggests the way Vietnam cope with China with regard to the South China Sea. And it is not about the limits of ASEAN's membership, but it is about the approach that ASEAN countries, including Vietnam, coping with China in general in the South China Sea issue.
Our next question is from Bob Feline. He's the chairman of an investment group called ChinaVest, based in San Francisco. His question is, in balancing relationships between the U.S. and China in this period of Sino-U.S. confrontation and competition, what are you telling the Biden administration about our relationship with Vietnam strategically?
Very contemporary, right?
Yes, we've gone beyond history.
Yeah, and I think that based on what I find in the book and what I can see, the connection from what happened in the past and what is happening now, I see ASEAN should be viewed more strategically in any foreign policy of the party concerns in the region. What I can see right now is that ASEAN centrality or the ASEAN central role in the multilateral arrangements in Asia Pacific are of greater consensus. So just look at the policy of the United States, China, Australia, New Zealand, even and say South Korea. The ASEAN centrality is greater and is more and more recognized. And what does it mean? It doesn't mean that ASEAN would become a leader in Asia Pacific, but the ASEAN arrangements, I mean the meetings, the principle of interstate relations, and is the role in bringing all the countries together can be still of help, especially when the US and China are engaging in the intensifying competition right now. So the complaints are multiple. ASEAN is still considered as the talk shop, or ASEAN is still considered as the organization that delivers less than their statements. But again, it is the only organization that can make sure that the members, I mean the 10 ASEAN members, could become at peace with each other, and that helps a lot, because if ASEAN can do that, can play that role well, Southeast Asia can become a region of peace and cooperation, and it reduces to a great extent the possibility of big powers involvement, making the countries like the one in the 50s and 70s of the last century.
Thank you. We're getting a lot of questions coming in now. Our next question is from Zachary Abuza at the National Defense University. His question is, when Vietnam joined ASEAN, one of the big concerns from other members was that it didn't have enough trained English-speaking diplomats to keep up with the sheer volume of ASEAN meetings. Vietnam quickly met that challenge. As someone who was in charge of training your nation's diplomats, I was hoping you could A, discuss the challenges that ASEAN membership posed, and B, looking forward, how has Vietnam adjusted its training and recruitment process?
Can I hear the second question again, please?
Surely. The second question was, looking forward, how has Vietnam adjusted its training and recruitment process?
Training?
Training, yes.
Okay.
And recruitment process. So how are you training? How it might be different than, how are you evolving?
Zach, I can say that you were there in the beginning. Just to introduce to the audience that Jack, when I joined the Fletcher School, Jack was there, and he understood how important for Vietnam to send people like us to the universities outside the Soviet bloc to learn one, English, and two, how international relations is taught and practiced outside the Soviet bloc. And I think that we have done quite well in terms of training a new generation of diplomats who are more conversant in English and more understanding of what is going or what is happening outside of Vietnam in the say non-socialist world. I think that that is a very good preparation for Vietnam to join not only ASEAN but the other multilateral organizations and arrangements. But frankly speaking, it is only a beginning, because for the generation like me, it is something like too late already to learn and act in the new setting. The English level is not as I myself or we ourselves really want. We can be good at say in the ASEAN activities. We can be good at taking notes or drafting the documents, but when we are asked to promptly interact with, especially with the debates or discussion that is ongoing, it takes some time for Vietnam and the representatives of Vietnam to participate in this kind of instant discussion. And as shown in the book, that even for the first 5 years, the participation of Vietnam in ASEAN was at the minimum level. And it took like 20 years before Vietnam have a new generation of people, of officials who can be more active in not only ASEAN but also in the UN meetings. And luckily, not our generation contributes a very small fraction of that contingent. Our younger colleagues are more trained and more fluent in English and had better understanding of of what is going on based on their training backgrounds. What we can do in order to improve our training, I think it is also a very big question. I myself faced together with my colleagues at Diplomatic Academy of Vietnam. English is, of course, one of the issue, but it is not a bigger one like it was before. But the world is changing so fast, and we have a long list of new issues that are really a challenge for people first to understand and to interact with the rest of the region or the world to cope, say, climate change, cybersecurity, water resource management. These are the new areas that are that have become part of our diplomacy baggage, and I think that we need a new generation to be trained on these matters, apart from these traditional security issues. So I don't know whether I answer this question in full or in a satisfactory way, but we really need a new approach to the training of our people working on the multilateral issues and multilateral organizations like ASEAN.
Tung, thank you. As you're talking, where the questions are coming in, we have technically about 12 minutes left, but hopefully maybe if you could stay a little bit longer. But I'm going to cut all questions off. The next question comes from Ms. Thuy Taek Tin Nguyen. I apologize if I've not pronounced your name correctly, but she is the Deputy Chief of Mission from the Myanmar Embassy here in Washington. And her question, put simply, is how would you classify ASEAN-US relations today?
You mean Myanmar?
She's from Myanmar, but she's asking,
yes.
How would you classify ASEAN-US relations in general today?
Okay. The relations between Myanmar, the ASEAN and US should be seen, I think, through the overlapping zones between the strategies of ASEAN and that of the US. ASEAN is the collective of small countries, while the US is the superpower. It seems that the policy goals or the interests are different. But a closer look would suggest that we have some overlapping zones, and from which the relationship between ASEAN and the US can enjoy, I think, firm ground. Let's say the peace and stability of the region. Is this a convergent interest between the two sides? And under the umbrella of regional peace and stability, we can put South China Sea, the water resource management, the economic development, and in a more fashionable way, we can put the rule of the roads even in that umbrella. So ASEAN, as long as it can play a role in ensuring peace and stability and cooperation in Southeast Asia, I think the United States would see the benefit of developing relations with ASEAN. ASEAN can be also of importance in the intensifying competition between the US and China, in the sense that ASEAN can offer a venue for the countries like the US and China to come and talk. So I think that the relevance of ASEAN is still there in the strategy of the United States and the ASEAN members, plus even China and other partners of ASEAN, including the countries that I have mentioned earlier.
Tung, our next question is from Brantley Womack, professor of political science and international relations at the University of Virginia. He says the unity of ASEAN is certainly good for Vietnam, but what about the diversity of ASEAN's interest and viewpoints? Are these useful as well?
Thank Professor Womack, and hi to you. I think that in the presentation, I said that the decision to join ASEAN is for a large part based on the recognition of the similarities. And I also mentioned that the recognition of the differences are there, but they did not prevent Vietnam from making a decision to join the ASEAN. And we are all aware of the differences in the political systems, in the cultures, and in the religions, and even in the mode of external relations of the member countries. But again, the similarities seems to be outweigh the differences, and that helps to hold ASEAN together like it is today. And of course, the differences continue to make ASEAN less effective, less united in some specific cases. And it's a dilemma.
Our next question is from Bill Hampton. He's a senior consultant for SIL International. His question is, has ASEAN membership helped strengthen relationships between Vietnam and specific ASEAN countries? And if that is the case, could you illustrate your point?
Very interesting question. I think that the membership of ASEAN, Vietnam's membership of ASEAN, is the product of the improved relations between Vietnam and the individual ASEAN members. And after Vietnam joined ASEAN, the relations between Vietnam and these countries are on the firmer relations because of several reasons. Reason number one is that the better understanding continue to serve as the new elements that boost the relationship. Vietnam, Malaysia, Vietnam, Indonesia, Vietnam, Singapore, and Vietnam, Philippines were in good terms before Vietnam joined ASEAN due to the efforts of reconciliation and socialization. And that made the decision of Vietnam to join ASEAN easier. Like I said, because we had a better understanding of the similarities. But since Vietnam joined ASEAN, the foundation become more consolidated, because it is the formal recognition from the part of Vietnam to the principles of ASEAN's the relations among the members. So none intervention, peaceful solution of the disputes, especially territorial disputes, and a consensus are the principles that the ASEAN members are so happy that Vietnam recognize and play by that rule. And I think that it is very important, especially in the aspect or in the in the way that the rest of the ASEAN members were happy or satisfactory with Vietnam's role as it played before in the Indochina Peninsula. So Vietnam treated Laos and Cambodia as the ASEAN members, as the ASEAN members, not as the countries of the old alliance formula in the 70s, even before. So that is one. Number two is that Vietnam and ASEAN can join, and other ASEAN members can join hands in dealing with the regional issues. You can name it from South China Sea to even Myanmar right now. So it consolidated the relationship in doing something and more things together. So I think that ASEAN's membership helps to consolidate more and more the relations between Vietnam and the individual ASEAN members.
Tung, I know we're coming up on the witching hour, but if we can handle maybe a few more questions.
Sure.
Our next question is from Michael Martin. When you were here in Washington, you knew him as being
yes, hi, Mike.
But he's now retired and is an independent analyst. His question is, as we approach the 80th anniversary of Japan's invasion of Southeast Asia, how does Japan's past expansionist policies influence relations with Vietnam and the rest of ASEAN in the present? Has Japan's past military aggression been relegated to history, or are there still concerns about Japan's intentions in the region?
I think that not only to Vietnam but to other ASEAN countries, the ASEAN countries, the process of reconciliation between Japan and the Southeast Asian nations have been rather good, at least in the sense that the animosity or the past experience are not often cited in the contemporary context. I can see it right now when I am here in Seoul. The historical experience is still a very difficult or turning point between Japan and Korea, and it is not the case between Japan and other between Japan and Southeast Asian nation. And I think that to deal with the historical experience of the difficult past somehow is done in a mutually satisfactory way between Japan and Southeast Asian countries. The economic cooperation is also happening, and then the support of Japan to ASEAN and to the issues that ASEAN is facing through namely human resource development or ODA or other matters, also building up to the better understanding of ASEAN about Japan's intention with regard to Southeast Asia. I'm not really an expert on this part of the international relations in the region, but I think that the process of reconciliation between Japan and Southeast Asian countries were conducted in a mutually satisfactory way.
Thank you. Our Linda Yar, the director of PISA at George Washington.
Hi, Linda.
I had the same thought. At the end of your comments, you were talking about Vietnam maybe being as a good example for other countries such as North Korea on how to better integrate a regional architecture. And she wanted to know, can you elaborate on this idea? I'd like to add on to it. I mean, as both countries are communist nations, you also not just have the official diplomatic ties, but you also have party-to-party ties, and how that might be helpful in helping North Korea become more integrated and responsible in the not only regionally but in the international community at large.
2 points here. One is that the lesson of Vietnam joining ASEAN shows that all the decision is made locally, and the pressure from outside seems to slow down the process of making a decision, the correct one. That's I found in my research on Vietnam's decision to join ASEAN. But the decision is also influenced by other factors from outside, and I think that Vietnam is lucky because our neighborhood is less difficult than, say, the Korean Peninsula. We have ASEAN existing before Vietnam joining it, and ASEAN was adopting a conciliatory approach. Just imagine that in the Northeast Asia region, we have such an organization like ASEAN. So for Vietnam, it's a matter of luck. We have ASEAN existing before Vietnam joining it. And also, like I said, also a matter of luck, because China refused to lead the socialist remaining countries. So also another matter of luck. So number one is the fact, and we have to recognize that the decision is made locally, but the decision can be influenced by favorable factors outside of the country. Number two is about legitimacy. In the case of Vietnam, joining ASEAN is a way to achieve economic reform and economic growth and better relations with other countries that ensure the favorable external conditions for economic development at home. And at the bottom line is about the better chance for the ruling party to stay in power and enjoy a greater legitimacy. So I think that the case of Vietnam can suggest these two important notions. And what we can do if the case of Vietnam can be of some help, I think that again the constructivist approach can be offering some cautiously hopeful scenario here. Socialization and increased interaction can lead to a better understanding and can help and can facilitate if an effective decision made locally. How interaction, how we can conduct operational socialization. I can see the case of Vietnam. From the case of Vietnam, I can see 3 points. Point number one is experience sharing. So the case of Vietnam adopting the renovation policy, being at peace with other countries can become an experience that can be shared with the countries that are having difficulties in the relations with other countries, being isolated, being being shut down from many from the regional or global organizations. So experience sharing is very important. Point number 2 is about capacity building. So the country like Vietnam back in 30 years ago needed a lot of effort with regard to capacity building, and any efforts of building the capacity for the authorities, especially for the decision makers, can be most welcome. So I know that Linda and John and others are working very hard in promoting the projects that serves to build the capacity of the countries like Vietnam 30 years ago. It takes time. It takes time, and it can be risky at some point, but at the end, it would be really good. 3 is engaging. And engage, what I mean engaging is want to facilitate the participation of an isolated countries to border setting outside the country. So before Vietnam joined ASEAN, Vietnam was facilitated to join ASEAN functional cooperation, to participate in the think tanks, activities, seminars, and roundtables with regard to make it more visible and make the people from Vietnam to be joining these activities in a more comfortable ways. And lastly is about socialization, interaction that leads to more interaction. And I think that the case of Vietnam joining ASEAN really shows that we can do something with regard to experience sharing, capacity building, and engaging to a country that is still, to any country that is still in the state of being embargoed or isolated.
Tung, this is going to be our last question. John McAuliffe asks, and I'm curious about this as well. Anytime I've ever gone into the foreign ministry, there always seem to be delegations of Cuban diplomats walking out whenever I might have been walking in. John asks, have your friends in Cuba ever discussed with you Vietnam's experience with ASEAN in terms of their relationship with the Organization of American States?
This is the area that I'm not really aware of. But I think what I have just said a few seconds ago can be applied here. Capacity building, experience sharing can be really of help for such a country like Cuba. I'm not really aware of the relations between Cuba and the existing organizations in Central America or in the Caribbean. But there is a great enthusiasm from the part of Cuba on the experience that Vietnam had before and during the reform. And I think that the experience that Vietnam could share with Cuba, especially in the abolishment of the two-tier currency, is very important. And I learned that Cuba is moving toward that path of making the local currency more convertible with the other currencies. So I think that it is one of the experience that Vietnam can share and get the positive response from Cuba. The other one is the agricultural reforms that gives the farmers more say in their decision to produce and to sell their products in the markets. So I think that we can share some experience with our Cuban friends. The capacity building is also very important, and I think that any fellowship programs that the Cuban students can be benefited from, especially in the areas of such as the public policy, or international relations, are most welcome.
We have gone over about 10 minutes now, but I think that's a reflection of a successful webinar. I want to thank the audience for their questions, and Ambassador, I want to thank you for the thoughtfulness and thoroughness in which you have answered them. As I said in the beginning, Vietnam was an isolated country with very few friends some decades back when I first went to Southeast Asia. And it's been heartening to see how Vietnam has become fully integrated as a responsible member of the, not just the ASEAN, but and Asia, but the international community at large. It's now a member of the expanded UN Security Council. Its role is not passive in ASEAN. And I think a great deal of credit goes to you in helping, over the last 25 years in enabling Vietnam to be as successful in its foreign policy that it is. So with that, I want to thank you again. I want to thank our audience for their questions, and we will see you again some other time. So have a good day, and Tung, have a good evening. Thank you very much again.
Thank you, John, and thank you everyone from the audience very much for this precious opportunity for me to interact with you. Thank you very much.
Stay well. Take care. Bye-bye.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.